This is a lecture from Open Tuition. For the free lecture notes that go with this podcast, please visit opentuition.com.
We'll start by talking about some well-known companies which have perhaps had problems and maybe occasionally successes. You don't need to know about real-life problems as such. You don't need to know exactly what's happening, in the latest company results or takeovers. You'll never be asked about that. Besides, the exam is written by the examiner often a year to 18 months before the examination date, so it can't be that contemporary. I'm telling you this really just to, in a way, set the scene about how even large and very well-run companies can hit problems, even with strategic planning, and occasionally maybe where they went astray in their strategic planning, so that they maybe in some cases failed. First case we have is IBM. You probably know of IBM as hopefully as maybe a computer company, but it was in around the 1970s that this was a very, very profitable company. It was, after the oil companies, about the most profitable company in the world, and had been for many, many years. And then, by around 1985, a huge loss. It was the largest corporate loss ever recorded. That's been dwarfed now by what some of the banks have managed recently, but then it was really quite something. Within a space of about 5 years, it went from very good profitability to a very serious loss, and at one point was in danger of having to be wound up. So what went wrong with IBM, a company which had maybe 20, 30 years of sustained profit growth, and then suddenly hit the buffers. And really it was in around 1980-81 that personal computers were invented. IBM had made a lot of its money from making huge old-style mainframe computers in great big manufacturing plants. They were quite complicated to work, needed a lot of help and repairs and so on to make companies use them efficiently. And then around 1981, personal computers were invented, which were relatively easy to operate. And also they were very easy to manufacture, really. It was almost a modular system we just plug together a little bit. It's almost in your garage, which is where Apple started, and you have a perfectly viable, really quite powerful computer. IBM knew about personal computers, but it kind of didn't quite understand what might become of them. I think it was a chairman of IBM who stated, "I can't imagine why anyone would want a computer at home." And really they were overtaken by other manufacturers, and once then networking started up, so you could have maybe a dozen, 2 dozen mobile personal computers connected together so that people in the office could share information, the old style computers became more and more redundant. Where IBM has got to now, it has essentially abandoned certainly desktop and laptop computer manufacturing. It can't make a big enough margin in those have become essentially commodities. We tend to buy on price, leaving Apple aside. You don't much care whether you have a Hewlett-Packard or a Lenovo or a Toshiba computer. They will all do roughly the same thing, and you buy on price very often. And that squeezes the margin. IBM saw that this was not going to be very profitable for them, and they moved more to providing services, consultancy, where each service that you give to a client, each bit of consultancy is unique and is not subject to the same price pressure. Nokia, BlackBerry, these are more recent examples of mobile phone manufacturers either coming to grief or almost coming to grief. Nokia was, I suppose, around 2008, had probably the biggest market share of mobile phones in the world. And within about 5 years, it was being sold to IBM. And what happened there was that Nokia was tied to an old operating system called Symbian. In the meantime, Apple iPhones were invented, smartphones were invented, and Nokia was a bit slow off the mark, and the phones it produced simply didn't compare very well to the new ones. Nokia or the phone division was eventually sold to Microsoft, and they did away with the Nokia trade name. Now they sell phones under the Lumia brand. So it was perhaps another example, IBM as an example, Nokia an example of perhaps slightly resting on your past glories, not seeing that maybe the world and what customers want and what technology is offering to you by the way of change, and kind of being lulled into a false sense of security. We're the biggest and best, we remain the biggest and best forever. BlackBerry had similar sort of problems. It was overtaken again by the smartphone. It had more of a niche market, little phones with a little kind of keyboard on them, used very often for corporate purposes on their own very highly secure network. They may well, succeed in rescuing themselves, but it has been quite a close run battle. Kodak, another company story full of woe. Kodak, you may and may not know, was a company which produced old-fashioned film, the old chemical films that went through the old sorts of cameras, and they were very, very good at it. Their colour film was very highly regarded, and it was really Kodak and Fujichrome were the two main manufacturers. Of course, what happened was that digital photography took off. You got increasingly good photographs without the use of film. And even though there was nothing wrong with their product, the kind of reason for it was just swept away by, again, new technology. They saw this happening. What they tried to do was to say, well, if the world doesn't want film and it wants digital cameras, we'll make digital cameras. But all their real know-how was in making films. It was in colour chemistry and colour science and so on. They had always made cameras, but they tended to be rather cheap cameras, really cameras to use to fill it with film. And when they made cameras, and they made perfectly good cameras, but when they tried to sell a camera maybe at $300 or $400, $500, why would you spend $500 on a camera made by Kodak, which has no history or pedigree in that, when you could buy a camera made by Olympus or Nikon, which had a huge history in very, very good camera manufacturing. Kodak went into administration. They had to sell off lots and lots of their patents to do with colour chemistry and so on. And they're kind of limping along, a very, 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 very much contracted business. The post office. In the UK, the post office has been privatised. What's happening, the post office is essentially two things. They have a letter post, and as you might imagine, that's gone down because, of course, emails have taken the place of many conventional mail systems, and they have parcels. Parcels is going up in business because of companies like Amazon. You order online and it's delivered by post. What the post office is finding, it had been a government-owned organisation, it's now privatised. They are having to face, certainly in the growing part of the business, the parcel business, they're having to face a lot of competition. Previously there'd been a kind of monopoly supplier, certainly of letters, and now they've been thrust out into the competitive environment, having to compete on service and price, and it remains to be seen just how they come out of that. They are, of course, hampered by this duty that they have in the UK to deliver letters anywhere in the country for the same price, and this provides them with very substantial overheads which have to be covered. So some large companies, by and large on this, a bit of a horror story, nearly all having their problems here. Whether some of them could be prevented by better strategic planning, perhaps by keeping your eye on technology and the way markets are moving, you might be able to move quickly enough to reinvent your business. Somebody like Kodak probably couldn't. All their success was rested in making colour films, and you can't just switch like that to say, well, I'm going to be good at cameras or something else just overnight. Perhaps their time had come.